Hey, it's Matt. I'm back with another small transparent watercolor. This time it's a winter plumed black-bellied plover. I got photos of this guy in Little Estero Lagoon in the Fort Myers area of Florida. I was on a photo trip there with my brother Ted, and there were a lot of cooperative shorebirds there. So this one I thought would make a fun painting. In working on this one, I wanted a really soft background, so I pre-wet the paper. That would allow the colors to mix really well on the page. And then I went in with a kind of sandy color to a mix of blues with, I think it was ultramarine and cerulean for the top. Hit that with the hairdryer, and then I started putting in some suggestions of some distant, blurry, landscapey things. So these eventually will become some little islands of sand and seagrass that was washed up on the shore. And I started putting in the shadows. At this point I darkened up the sky a little bit and started bringing in some of the closer watery areas. And part of this was not exactly from the photo reference. I wanted to kind of bring some of those blues down to separate the belly, which is going to be really white. So I brought in some of those blues because I thought that would separate that out rather than having some of the sandy colors beneath it. And eventually some of these areas that are frisketed on the bottom for the grasses, some of that's going to be much more green than it is at the moment. So I was kind of just frisketing off the highlight areas and the lighter areas. At this point I started using a toothbrush to spritz in some sandy texture. And so I'd mix some fairly opaque paint once I had the shadows established on the foreground. And then I started bringing in some of that sandy thing with the color. And I'd use a piece of folded paper to separate off the background so I wouldn't bring that texture up too far. Then I started putting in some blurry chunks of grass for the middle ground. And what I wanted to do was have the background really blurred out and then have that slowly come to focus as we came forward. So in doing that, I wanted to do two things. One, control how blurry things were, and also how much contrast there was. Once I had the background that I was happy with, I peeled off the frisket and transferred the rest of the lines for the painting, and then went about coloring in the lightest local colors of everything. And this was mostly done with a number 6 round brush for some of the smaller areas like the legs and the grasses. I brought in a number 2, as you see here. Painting these gray winter plumed shorebirds is kind of a different sort of challenge. If you have the bright colors, they kind of develop a little bit more quickly. And with these gray mottled birds, there's a lot of subtlety in them, and they're actually harder to paint than those brightly colored birds. So these are a little different than some of the things I work on. One of the other things that was interesting in this one was that when you're in that South Florida area, Sanibel and Little Estero, you have these super white sand beaches from all the crushed up shells that make up the sand. And while you're there, you have this tremendous sense of how light it is, and it is the sand beaches in the sunlight almost burn your eyes, and everything's really high key. And so sometimes the photos show that, sometimes they don't show it as much, but I kind of tried to push it to a lighter key, brighter scene than perhaps the photo had, just because that was kind of the experience of what it was like down there. And these plovers, I love these subtle mottled patterns that you get on the neck and on the wings, and they're really They're really fun to paint. They're a challenge in a way that you want it to look grayish at the end, but really there's a lot of browns, and in this case I brought in some of the browns and oranges to bring all those things together. And in the end it reads kind of as a gray brown, but in the process of painting it, you end up putting a fair amount of color in there. And the same's kind of true of the shadows. You can see in the photo reference that I took, the shadows are kind of bluish, and I pushed those a little bit more in the purple range. And that's for two reasons. One, I wanted it to separate from the background on the belly of the bird, so I kind of pushed the belly shadows and the rump shadows more in the purple range, and those will separate with the blues of the water behind it. And also I thought those would do well against some of the sandy colors, that we'd have a nice, kind of color opposites with the kind of yellowy tan colors and then of the sand, and then the purpley colors of the shadows. So pretty much at this point in the painting, everything's done with the number 2 round to keep everything really sharp. There are some little areas that I'll bring in a smaller brush just to do fine lines, but most of it you can control with the number 2. And you can see from the palette on the right, I'm glazing mostly at this point. And as I work through the painting, your pigments start getting darker and darker, and you're using less of it, little sparkles of color to just define little edges of the grasses, or the little marks on the feet and the scales on the feet. So while you start off and you're working very transparently, as you get toward the end, you find yourself working a little bit more opaquely. You're just picking out those details to sharpen the edges and get things to a sense of completion. Finishing details, putting in some of those purpley shadows, getting the signature down, and then picking at some more details before I called it finished. So again, this was a winter-plumed black-bellied plover from Florida. Well, thanks for watching. If you get a chance, leave a comment or have a peek at the blog or the website.